As we push closer and closer to NHL and fantasy hockey playoff season, there are a bunch of different angles that you need to be considering to try and take your team over the top. Best players on the worst teams is one of them. I'll take a look at that on today's episode of the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast, along with Carter Hart, leave of absence, and a league-wide injury update, and Wednesday's bets. Thank you so much for joining me for the Wednesday episode of your source for fantasy hockey news. Let's tap in and let's get this paper.
You're Locked On Fantasy Hockey, your daily podcast on fantasy hockey. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Fantasy fanatics, hockey heads, and degenerate gamblers, welcome back inside the lab to your source. It's the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast. Shout out to all of our everydayers for making us your first listen every single day. Today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get up to $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. My friends, you know who it is. It's your boy, Big Flip Livingstone. Been holding it down on the show for almost 2 full years now. You can check out my work all across Dauber Hockey, pickboss.com. I've been holding it down on the fantasy front for a number of years, including at The Score. Speaking of which, we got a number of big guests on tap. Tomorrow, I got Josh Wegman, fantasy guru of The Score app. Next week, leading national writer for The Score, NHL writer John Madish. Make sure you guys are tapped in. We got a lot of new content on the way to make sure that your fantasy teams are in tip-top shape. Today's episode, hope you can see it there on the screen. If you're not over on YouTube, head over and smash that subscribe button. We're talking about Carter Hart a little bit today. This is actually a player that has been very near and dear to my own heart for a number of years and for a number of reasons. I want to break down what's going on with this goaltender. He's taken an indefinite leave of absence from the Philadelphia Flyers. It has to be spoken about. Injury updates around the league. Adin Hill, Jeff Skinner, Patty Kane. I got a little bit of news for all of y'all. I'll kick off the show that way very quickly. And an angle that I want to talk about. How about the best of the worst, sneaky good fantasy pieces, one from each of the worst teams in the NHL? I have one of the players that these are the kinds of guys right now that other GMs might overlook that you can augment your roster and really be the difference. Chicago Blackhawks, San Jose Sharks, Ottawa Senators, Columbus Blue Jackets. Those are the 4 worst teams in the NHL, and it's been hard to find fantasy value on any of them, but I'll do that for y'all. Wednesday's bets. Let me go to it very quickly with this injury roundup. Again, thank you for joining us, my friends. Steele should be back tomorrow. My man's dealing with a rugged sickness. He'll be back, though, better than ever. Adin Hill. He has been one of those goaltenders that it's hard to really explain how he has been this good over the last, let's say, year and a half. Arizona Coyotes. He's played for the San Jose Sharks. He comes into the postseason last year for the Vegas Golden Knights and runs off an 11-4 record, 2.17 goals against, and a .930 save percentage to go to the Stanley Cup and win it. Then he comes into this season, if you weren't buying into it, 10-2-2, 2 shutouts, 1.93 goals against, and a .933 save percentage. This is a goaltender that I drafted. I was buying in. That was all I needed to see, along with how good the Vegas Golden Knights were. We know they started hot. We know they have struggled. Their head coach called them out the other night saying they're playing beer league hockey. This is a situation that now not only does this team need to respond, I know they've been banged up. Jack Eichel is out as well, and some other pieces. Adin Hill coming back is going to be a big piece of news, not only for fantasy heads out there who probably, just like me, stashed him on the IR. That's a good idea on a good team. Or if you haven't and you dropped him and maybe you're looking to add a goalie, go out there and take a look to make sure Adin Hill is there. I don't know what his percentages are right now. Run it back. Make sure you're taking a look into this situation. That was number 1, Adin Hill, back for the Vegas Golden Knights. Patty Kane. This is another intriguing situation. We know the injury he's dealing with is actually not related to his hip resurfacing injury that he dealt with in the offseason. This is a situation, though, after you hear the quote, and then I'll bring it up from Derek Lalonde right here. Quote, He'll probably get on the ice sometime this week. I'm hoping to have him before the break. If not comfortable, we'll have him after the break, end quote. He says he'll be on the ice sometime this week. Given that entire quote, given his age and importance to this club, especially since coming back and putting up 16.7 goals, 9 assists in 19 games, they will not be rushing this man back in any aspect. To me, hearing that quote, prepare yourself if you're a Patrick Kane GM that he will miss the next 3 or 4 games. They'll take that time over the All-Star break. That just makes too much sense. That's not even me reading too much into that quote. Read into it as you will. It makes sense. They'll probably take their time and give Patty Kane that little bit of extra rest over the All-Star break. So tap into that. Lastly, the last one I wanted to bring up, Jeff Skinner. Coming back for the Buffalo Sabres, he was at practice, full practice participant, looking like he should either be back against the Ducks while I'm recording this late Tuesday night, or he'll be back against I think they're playing Thursday night. Anyway, Jeff Skinner's missed the last 5 or 6 games. Is he going to be the savior that brings this Buffalo Sabres team from a bad start into the postseason? No. Their slim postseason chances are going to have to rely on the whole team being better back to front. But he's going to slot back into a line with Alex Tuck and Tage Thompson. This is where we have to pay attention because he leads the team in goals with 15. He can be a very, very streaky goal scorer. He's also going to play on the top power play unit. You have to pay attention to these situations. Jeff Skinner's ownership, I know, is high. It's in the 80s. It's in the high 70s on all platforms. But if he is out there, or if he's on your IR and you haven't been paying attention, make sure you're utilizing Jeff Skinner in a very, very big way. I think, given his streakiness, we're either going to see him go ice cold or go red hot. I know that's not exactly a bold take, but let's just see what happens with Jeff Skinner. I got my eyes peeled. These are 3 situations, Skinner, Hill, Kane, that a lot of GMs out there are looking at. That's why I had to bring it up quickly. Carter Hart, maybe the most important takeaway here. We know goaltenders, number one, and Carter Hart is a number 1 goaltender. He's been granted a indefinite leave of absence for personal reasons from the Philadelphia Flyers. 12-9-3 this season, .906 save percentage, and a .280 goals against. Like I mentioned, this is a player that I invested in my league, in my Keeper Dynasty League. We have free agent auction dollars, 100 of them for the entire season. You can trade them as well. A few seasons ago, when it looked like Carter Hart was going to get that final look, moving up from the Everett Silver Tips in the WHL to take the reins in Philly, I forget who I traded, but I went for a whole bunch of free agent bucks, and I spent like 80 on Carter Hart because number 1 goaltenders don't pop up on the waiver wire very often. He has performed very well considering his setup in Philly. And I just wanted to ream off this stat. He was obviously a second-round draft pick. Hart's 96 wins since entering the league in the 2018-19 season are 18th among NHL goaltenders. That might not exactly jump off the page, but let's remember how bad this Philadelphia club has been. And Philadelphia is where goalies usually go to have their careers expire. Goalie graveyard. Shout out to Carter Hart. Hope he's doing okay, but enter the young Swede, 6'3", 24-year-old Samuel Ersson, who is 12-6-3 this year with 3 shutouts, 2.36 goals against, and a .909 save percentage. Another player that I think I'm lucky to have added off the waiver wire now a bunch of weeks ago as a little insurance. He's getting the run out. Even if it's only a week or 2, you need a little goalie love. He's going to be a number 1 goaltender. The Philadelphia Flyers have obviously been in flux, but they're more than quality enough for me to immediately tell whoever is listening to this episode in need of a goalie, Samuel Ersson is your target. Go out there and add him. Good numbers. Philly is a pretty good, improved team. Yeah, they're going to still have their issues, but this is another situation. Had to bring up. Hope Carter Hart, all kudos due. Hope he's doing well. Samuel Ersson, take a look. Let's take a look at the rest of today's episode because you know I'm bringing that heat. Best of the worst fantasy players on fantasy pieces on the worst NHL teams. I got one from each of the bottom feeding clubs, like I mentioned, and of course, big time bets. Today's episode, my friends, is brought to you by Indeed. You need to be checking out Indeed. If you need to hire, that's what you need. Matching up and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data. Matching engine that helps you find quality candidates the fastest. I love Indeed. It helps you find jobs. It helps all people find what they need, whether you're an employer or an employee. Make sure that you're tapping in, and listeners of our show right now get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. All you need to do is go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now to support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this pod. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. You need to hire. You know you need Indeed. Much love to everyone tuning in for the Wednesday episode of the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast. As mentioned, you know you got to be holding us down Monday through Friday. We do our best. We weren't here Tuesday. Sometimes life gets in the way, my friends. But I hope that some of this fantasy advice for real is bringing value to your fantasy club every single day. And I think the angle that I'm going to talk about next, best of the worst, sneaky good fantasy pieces on the worst clubs in the NHL. You've heard it from Steele and I a lot, but if you actually employ the strategy of course, it's going to take a little bit more digging looking at these teams, especially honestly, Ottawa Senators, Columbus Blue Jackets, okay, they're bad. And they're all pretty close in points. But for some reason, I'm just looking at the Chicago Blackhawks and San Jose Sharks squads and their rosters. Man, that is rough to actually dig in and find some value. But I hope that's exactly what I've done. And let me start with, I think, the hardest situation to find it, the Chicago Blackhawks. Peter Mrazek, I have to show a little bit of love to, and I know this might be a stretch, but remember the angle I'm taking here. Peter Mrazek, all of these players are the perfect kind of situational week-to-week ads that you have to keep on your radar, even if you do this after I ream off these four. Write these four players down, because over the next couple of weeks, I guarantee you, with the right schedule, and I'll talk a little bit about that with a San Jose Shark player in a sec, these will be the kinds of pieces that if you're able to augment your roster with the holes that you need to fill with them, you will be at the top of the table if you're close right now. Peter Mrazek over the last 5 games, .935 save percentage. That's all you really need to hear, because that's where the value is. 2-3-0. This is a goaltender getting it done behind a ragtag blue line and a forward group that resembles a bad AHL squad. So just remember that. And I'll bring up Peter Mrazek in a second, just a little bit more. He is actually going to probably be re-signed by the Chicago Blackhawks. So if you're not buying into me, they're willing to give Peter Mrazek a shot to at least hold it down. 45% on Fantrax, 31% on Yahoo, 10% on ESPN. Peter Mrazek. These, again, guys, back-end options, but best of the worst. Sneaky good fantasy pieces on the worst NHL clubs. Peter Mrazek, for me, deserves a little bit of love. How bad the Chicago Blackhawks have been. Little sip here. Thank you very much. This is especially where I miss Steele, because I'm rambling, but let me try and keep it tight. The San Jose Sharks, oh my goodness, historically bad. This is, again, when you look at this team play, I almost do, and I never actually feel bad for professional franchises, and they're only 2 points back of the Blackhawks. But this San Jose Sharks club, man, they are straight up and down doo-doo. However, there has been one player that stood out for me, and that's a guy on pace for over 25 goals in Fabian Zetterlund. Fabian Zetterlund right now on this squad has 14 Genos, 21 penalty minutes. He's blocking shots. Time on ice is up. 49 hits, 42 block shots. He's doing a little bit of everything. And again, I'm looking at the schedule a little bit, and I looked at the San Jose Sharks over the next 6 or 7 games or so. They play the Ducks, Flames, Blue Jackets, Sabres, and others. So right now, especially, Fabian Zetterlund is a player that I think you can find a lot of value in. That's the main takeaway with all of these. Take a shot. You have a hole to fill. Why not get a little nitty gritty? Of course, if there's better options out there, hammer them. I'm trying to lay you down a little security blanket, because this is the time of the fantasy season. You can't afford to be perhaps forgetting to fill a lineup hole. I've done it. Perhaps putting a player in over another guy who is injured or not playing. Don't do it. And these kinds of pieces, he's owned at 6% on Yahoo, less on ESPN, 20 on Fantrax. They're going to be out there as emergency fill-in situations and perfect to do just that. Shout out to Mrazek. Shout out to Fabian Zetterlund. Nasty little shot on Zetterlund. Obviously only on pace for 37 points. Doesn't exactly jump off the page, but it's the goals that count for this kid, and I think he's going to continue to do just that. Two more players very quickly. I got bets. You know what? I'll go one more player. I'll go one more after the break. Ridley Gregg, Ottawa Senators, 38% on Fantrax, but less than 4% on ESPN and Yahoo. To me, he has been one of their most consistent players, solid all season long. And Ridley Gregg is a bit of a banger league beauty. Again, 17 points in 32 games is not going to jump off the page. But in keeper dynasty leagues, especially, I'm getting that in. He is very relevant. 51 hits, 15 block shots, 31 penalty minutes, 6 goals, 11 assists, in only 14 minutes of ice time per night. Imagine what he gets if some of these rumors around the Ottawa Senators, by the way, Kubalik on the move, perhaps Tarasenko on the move, maybe Ridley Gregg. I don't know. I can just see his numbers going up. I understand he's a centerman, and Shane Pinto is back, which is another sneaky good player on a bad team. He goes hand in hand with Ridley Gregg. Got to give a little shout out to Ridley Gregg, good Lethbridge boy, only 21 years old as well. And, I don't know if you've had a look at his percentages. 38 on ESPN, on Fantrax, like I said, and out there on both ESPN and Yahoo. So consider both Pinto and Ridley Gregg as some options to fill in your center slot over the next couple of weeks, even though those Ottawa Senators have been a complete mess on and off the ice. But we don't need to talk about that. We're keeping things positive. Going to talk about one more player on the Columbus Blue Jackets right around the break. And of course, my big time bets for Wednesday night. Hoping to keep a little bit of a money train rolling on what has been a tough couple of weeks for your boy. Thank you for holding us down for this Wednesday episode. Today is sponsored by Sleeper. Make sure you're checking out the Sleeper app. It is one of Steele and I's absolute favorite. Make sure you're downloading it today. It's almost a halfway point in the season. And regardless of where your team is in the current standings, you could be winning big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, official daily fantasy hockey app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy, especially, of course, daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your money on daily fantasy hockey contests. All you got to do is use promo code Locked On NHL, and you will get up to $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code Locked On NHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. My friends, shout out to all of y'all, because doing these episodes, I hope we're bringing a little bit of knowledge to your squads, helping them stay in tip-top shape as we push towards this postseason. Last player, Kirill Marchenko. Come on now. We know he sees some growing pains. 52% on Fantrax, 10% on Yahoo, and 60 on ESPN. When I look at the numbers, I look at how bad this team is. This kid is going to pop off. 21 goals last year in 59 games. Only 14 so far, only in 43. I think he is going to be one of those goal scorers in this league with flair, with special talent. And the Columbus Blue Jackets aren't going to be as bad as we think for very long. There is a lot of good young offensive pieces. Say what you will about the back end, which is clearly much more of a mess. I think this Columbus Blue Jackets team holds some sneaky good value down the stretch. And this is exactly why I'm bringing up a player in Marchenko that I have before. Right now, he's shooting the puck 109 shots on goal this year, 14 goals. I think this is he's just scratching the surface of what he can do. And given that the mix of young Russians are there to make these guys comfortable, I know that's a bit of a intangible that's hard to put your finger on. This is one of those reasons that I'm trying to read into it, and I dig into the numbers a little bit more. Let this ice time creep up. Last year, 16 minutes in ice time. This year, about the same. given how bad this Columbus Blue Jackets team has been, they've been banged up as well. Boone Jenner back. Let's see what a little bit of veteran presence up in that top six can do. Just having your captain back on the ice again, little bit of one of those angles that maybe not a lot of people are considering. But given that we've seen Marchenko be this good on how bad Columbus has been, I need to keep my eyes peeled on him. And I'll leave it at this. He is my favorite and most intriguing young talent on this team. Shout out to our boy Troy, big Columbus Blue Jackets fan. Tap me in on what you're thinking on this one. Let me wrap this up quick, my friend. Same game parlay. I mentioned that this has been a bit of a tough stretch. However, tonight's board is also a bit of a tough one. So when I dig into this Chicago Blackhawks team into Seattle, you're going to go flip. The odds you're going to throw out at me right now are going to be doo-doo. They might be, but that's why I'm going to put it together in a same game parlay. Seattle on the money line right now, what I'm looking at is about minus 240, which makes sense. So there's zero value there. But when you look at their last game against Chicago, 7-1 back in December, Chicago is ragtag right now. 3-10 in their last 13, 2-5 in their last 7 against Seattle. So I'm liking Seattle on the money line for sure. Number 2, this is where we're going to get our value. Jared McCann in his last 5 games has 4 goals and 3 assists, starting to cook. In his 16 regular season games against the Chicago Blackhawks, 10 goals, 5 assists, almost a point per game player. So hit me with Jared McCann, anytime goal. And we're going to parlay that all together with the under in this one. 6 of the last 6 games for Chicago on the road have gone under the number. Seattle, Joey Decord playing good hockey. 5 of their last 5 home games under the number, keeping that breakdown super short and tight for y'all. Same game parlays these days, if your bets are being dialed back just like me, perfect way to make a little bit of money. Shout out to FanDuel. That's where you should be making these same game parlays. Let me recap it for you real quick. Seattle money line at home against the Chicago Blackhawks. That one makes a ton of sense, obviously. Let's go Jared McCann to keep it rolling, anytime goal. Under 6.5. That number might be up a little bit. So check it out. I'm going to hold it down at 6.5. If you have to tease it for a lesser odd, let's just do it and get a win, people. It's been a struggle. So that's the final one, under 6.5 between the Blackhawks and the Kraken. Much love for holding us down every single Monday through Friday on the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast. Make sure you're checking out the 24/7 streaming service that Locked On has running all the days of the week, 24/7. Just like I said, shout out to Steele, who will be back for tomorrow's episode. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you tomorrow.